This is the second part of the World History Lecture on Ming China and empires in Asia in and around 1500. I was talking about the fact that Hongwu was able to establish himself through the publication of laws, through his own personal reputation, through getting civil servants and bureaucrats to swear a personal loyalty to him. And that his own reputation, his own military prowess had made this a fairly easy task for him as founder of the Ming dynasty. His successors would struggle with this question of establishing their own authority, and one successor who does struggle with it but comes up with some novel and ultimately problematic solutions is Yongle. Yongle was the fourth or fifth, if I remember correctly, son of Hongwu, but he was not in the direct line of succession. That is, it was the son of another of Hongwu's sons, that is, it was one of Hongwu's grandsons, who was seen to be first in line. But Yongle fought that grandson after Hongwu's death in the late 1390s, and in fact, Yongle succeeded in winning this internal battle for control of the Ming Empire. This meant, however, that Yongle had some real concerns about how to project his authority and about how to maintain his authority. He did not have Hongwu's reputation as sort of almost a Chinese national hero in defeating the Mongols, but rather was someone whose rise to power had come about through a great deal of infighting, rather violent infighting within the Ming dynasty. So when Yongle becomes emperor in 1402, he's seeking to establish himself, and he decides to do so in a couple of different and very dramatic ways. The first is that he decides to reestablish what was called the tribute system. Under earlier Chinese empires, China had exacted a tribute, that is basically a fee or a payment, from other Asian kingdoms, ranging from kingdoms in Japan and Korea through Indonesia and Malaysia, all the way at times as far west as Sri Lanka, and including places like Burma as well. This tribute system, this system of basically collecting payment to ensure good behavior and to basically states would pay, or princes or kings would pay to basically keep the Chinese away. This had fallen into disfavor under the Mongols, who were not really that concerned with extending their power across the Indian Ocean. But Yongle decided to bring back the tribute system as a way of establishing Chinese power. Not only that, but he wanted to do so in a way that represented his own power, a way that demonstrated his own power. For Yongle, rather than having sort of the military authority that Hongwu sort of automatically had conferred on him, for Yongle, the essence of justifying and authorizing his rule depended very much, or was based very much around the idea of creating what political theorists might call a theater of power. That is, organized displays of power which Yongle could use to demonstrate his authority and to demonstrate the power of the emperor on its whole. So the tribute system was designed in the first place to establish or reestablish China within Asia, but it was also designed to give to the Chinese people the image of Yongle as this mighty presence in Asia to whom people paid obedience and paid tribute. And this picture here depicts Yongle receiving an ambassador or an envoy from one of these kingdoms. Yongle is up on the stage. This is basically, and quite literally, a theater for power, for the display of power. And for Yongle, it's about receiving this ambassador in the sight of others, having this ambassador come and pledge tribute and pledge that his state or his kingdom or his principality will not do anything to endanger China, and that they seek China's protection and therefore making this payment. It's a way of displaying the power of China. It's a way of displaying the power of the emperor personally. And this is something that's very important for Yongle. making sure that the emperor's power is displayed, and by having the emperor sort of juxtaposed, or the superiority of the emperor juxtaposed or placed in context with the supposed inferiority, or the subordinate position of these envoys. In order to make the tribute system work, Yongle expanded and really almost sort of refounded the Chinese Navy. And that's the next section I'd like to look at here, which is that in order to exact tributes and to demonstrate Chinese power in Asia, Yongle realized that you needed to expand the Chinese naval presence. And this is what Yongle does. Yongle charges an admiral, a man named Zheng He, whose name appears on this PowerPoint slide. Zheng He is a Muslim sailor, someone with a lot of experience in navigation, and a ship captain. He's from southern China, a part of China which had embraced Islam several centuries before, and he is charged with building a fleet. It turns out to be a massive fleet. Several hundred ships, thousands of men. This fleet will make a series of voyages between the early 1400s and 1433. The purpose of this fleet, which contains these massive ships, that is, ships that are several hundred feet long, at least 100 feet high, that can carry several hundred sailors, all sorts of cargo, massive riggings with both square and triangular sails, bulkheads, axial rudders, all of these things that we've seen as sort of hallmarks of Chinese shipbuilding design in this period. Zheng He is going to go out and truly fly the flag. That is, go and sail around the Indian Ocean and demonstrate to the people in the Indian Ocean that China is back, that the Mongols are out, and that China is back and ready to assert itself as an Asian power. The voyages that Zheng He takes and that his fleet takes over this 25 to 30 year period are interesting because they raise a very specific historical hypothetical. That is, this is the one moment in which a fleet of such size and such capability exists within the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is primarily a decentralized region. It's a region where there are small city-states, port cities, places that tend to look outward, that connect with each other across the Indian Ocean, that don't necessarily have great ties to landed empires or to kingdoms inland from these port cities. There's not a lot of protection. This is it's a very wealthy, but it's also a very vulnerable economic system. For this brief period in the early 1400s, there does exist a fleet, a power strong enough that if it had wished, it might have brought this particular economic system, this particular trade network, under some sort of centralized control. It doesn't. That is, for Zheng He, this is more about going out and ensuring that people respect China. It will include things like, for example, kidnapping. Zheng He's fleet will at one point kidnap the king of Sri Lanka because of his refusal to pay the tribute. That kidnapping does ultimately force him to pay the tribute. The fleet will get as far as the east coast of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The fleet will return with all sorts of gifts because people will decide that even if they don't technically have to pay tribute to the Ming Emperor, like, for example, rulers in East Africa or on the western coast of India, they'll decide that it might be nice to send a gift anyways. And there are Chinese texts that record not just the precious metals and jewels and exotic sorts of foods that came back to China, but also the fact that many rulers made gifts of animals. That is, there are accounts of elephants and tigers and particularly giraffes from East Africa, which were brought back and which were displayed and were pictured in these texts quite prominently because, again, they reflected on the power of the emperor to command attention and to command loyalty and respect throughout the Indian Ocean world. So Zheng He makes these voyages. He makes them in these massive ships. I'll switch the slide here for a second. There were about 5 or 6 years ago, there was an effort to build some sort of replicas of these ships. They were massive, much larger. You can see some people on the top of them. I'll give you a nice size of scale here, just a little bit. Again, about 400 feet in length, at least 100 feet high. They dwarfed the sorts of ships that, for example, the Portuguese would arrive in the late 1400s in the Indian Ocean. Portuguese vessels would top out at about 85 to 100 feet in length, whereas these Chinese vessels were 3 or 4 times that. They were designed, again, to sort of overawe and to impress people throughout the Indian Ocean. So this is one of Yongleu's strategies. In 1433, after Yongluo's death, because of infighting at the Ming Emperor's court, this fleet is in fact destroyed, and Zheng Ho is recalled from duty, is basically disgraced, and never given a position of real command again. Zheng Ho is seen as perhaps as having accumulated a little too much power and a little too much influence around the emperor due to his voyages. There's also concern within the empire that perhaps China needs to concentrate more on its own internal defenses, especially against the Mongols to the north, rather than worrying about exerting its power across the Indian Ocean. Again, to return to this hypothetical, this is the one moment in which there existed this fleet that had potentially the power and the capability to centralize control over this region, or at least was large enough, was significant enough to deter possibly any other power from trying to come in and exert its own sort of influence over the Indian Ocean trade world. In fact, it's the disappearance of this fleet that removes this, you might say, deterrent factor, or removes this obstacle to another power, as we'll talk about in a little while, European powers in particular, to remove this power, this deterrent to outside powers. That is, Europeans and others might have thought twice about coming in and trying to impose their will upon the Indian Ocean system had the Chinese fleet remained in existence and been well known. Instead, though, in 1433, because of disagreements within the Chinese court, rivalries over the position of Zheng Ho, and concern that China was better served by focusing on its own interior defenses rather than on overseas expansion, that for all of these reasons, the fleet was abandoned, and the Indian Ocean Trade Network was left without this deterrent power, or this sort of warning power that might have caused other nations or other powers to consider themselves, or to consider their actions more than once before embarking on efforts to try to control the Indian Ocean Trade Network. So the tribute system is one of Yongleu's ways of creating a theater of power, expanding the Chinese presence overseas in a way that reflects well upon him. Yongleu is also going to start one other project. He won't live to see its completion, but in the late 14-teens and early 1420s, he moves the capital north from the city of Nanjing to the city of Beijing. Beijing had been the Mongol capital. Hongwu had moved the capital south, closer to his own home province or near Nanjing. But Yongleu, after winning this internal battle over succession to Ming rule, to the throne, goes back to Beijing, and in some ways destroys all remnants of the former Mongol capital and begins to build up a new and complete imperial capital. One of the things that's going on is that by razing or destroying the all traces of the Mongol capital, in some ways, Yongleu is repeating his father's conquest of the Mongols, reminding people again that the Ming dynasty had destroyed Mongol influence. He can't actually fight the Mongols, but he can destroy where the Mongols had been, or just destroy what had been the seat of Mongol power, and then establish his own power in that same place. So he's going to build this new city of Beijing. It's going to be planned perfectly symmetrically, and at the heart of it is going to be something called the Imperial City. Again, this is going to be a way of demonstrating his power by demonstrating that the emperor lives in, resides in, commands such a capital. And within the Imperial City, there's going to be a further city, and that'll be called the Forbidden City. There is a sort of a box within a box structure here, where you have the city of Beijing, as you can see in this map here, an inner city. Within that inner city, you have the Imperial City, and then you have the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is where the emperor resides. It's where his closest confidants reside. And let me switch the slide here again for you. This gives you a view of the way in which the Imperial City works. That is, the Imperial City contains within it the Forbidden City, which, as you can see here in this diagram, is surrounded almost entirely by water. The structure of the Imperial City, and especially the Forbidden City, is again designed to remind people of the emperor's power and wealth. By calling it the Forbidden City and by restricting access to it, to the emperor, his family, and to those who were the closest advisors, the emperor is also trying, Yongle is also trying to create a sort of imperial mystique. He's trying to create the notion that the emperor is someone who is not quite ever really seen, someone who exercises his power but is a sort of mystical person. It's a way of giving the emperor a sort of a godly status. And in fact, in Chinese imperial practice, the idea or the tradition held that the emperor was sort of a mediator between heaven and earth, that the emperor sort of held a balance between, you might say, the supernatural and the natural worlds. And the Forbidden City, and the sort of exclusiveness of the Forbidden City, helped to add to the mystery of the emperor. Very few people saw the emperor. What did the emperor look like? How did the emperor act? It was all this sort of speculation, which kept people focused on the emperor, which kept people focused on the emperor's role as this sort of semi-divine person. Within this city, within the Forbidden City in particular, the various palaces and the various temples all, again, stressed harmony. They stressed the role or the balance that the emperor brought to the relationship between this world and the next world. That is, that as you went in, there were various halls. For example, you went in through the Gate of Supreme Harmony.